Millions watched live as Sean Hannity leaned forward, that familiar smirk tugging at his lips. His voice dripped with condescension as he hurled the kind of insult he'd perfected over decades on cable television. It was sharp, dismissive, calculated. To sting, the panel chuckled nervously. For a split second, the cameras caught the flicker of discomfort across the room. Hannity thought he'd landed the knockout blow, the kind that silences a guest and leaves his audience roaring with approval. But this time, something was different. The words hung in the air like smoke, poisonous and heavy. Viewers at home froze. Was he really going to go there? Was he really going to take a cheap shot at a sitting congresswoman, an accomplished black woman who had risen from the courtrooms of Texas to the halls of Washington? The insult wasn't just about her. It was about everything she represented. Identity, resilience, dignity. Hannity sneered as if he had all the power in the room. But the silence that followed told another story. On Twitter, the first shockwaves rippled out within seconds. Hashtags flared like sparks in dry grass. Screenshots of Hannity's words spread with captions of disbelief. Did he really just say that? Clips were clipped, rewound, slowed down, magnified. The insult replayed again and again, not as triumph, but as indictment. And while Hannity's panel forced uneasy laughs, the audience watching could sense a storm brewing. Because this was not just television. This was not just banter. This was a line crossed on live broadcast. A moment where arrogance revealed itself so starkly that it could not be unseen. Millions felt it in their bones. Here was a man too comfortable in his chair, too smug in his power, too sure that his words would cut and his target would fold. But Jasmine Crockett did not fold. She didn't flinch. Behind her eyes, you could almost see the gears turning. Calm, patient, ready. Hannity had no idea what was coming. No idea that his insult would become the opening act of a drama that would flip the script, not only on him, but on the very stage he commanded. And as the panel shifted uneasily, as the cameras rolled on, the question burned. How would Jasmine respond? What would she say that left the entire country stunned? For years, Sean Hannity has sat at the center of conservative media power, a self-styled kingmaker whose nightly broadcasts reach millions. To his audience, he is the unwavering defender of the right, the sharp-tongued arbiter of who belongs in the national conversation and who gets mocked out of it. His stage has become the proving ground where guests are either humiliated into silence or forced to dance to his rhythm. Hannity thrives on control, and his fans love him for it. He has cultivated a persona that radiates certainty, authority, and above all, dominance. That's why this moment mattered. Hannity wasn't just lobbing an insult at another politician, he was drawing a line in the sand. To him, Jasmine Crockett was not simply a guest on his show. She was a symbol. A young, unapologetic black congresswoman, proud of her roots, proud of her identity, unwilling to bend to the old rules of politeness that had so often silenced women like her in the past. By targeting her, Hannity wasn't merely defending his ideology. He was defending an entire worldview that felt threatened by voices like Crockett's voices that refused to be diminished. And Crockett was more than just another rising Democrat. She had quickly established herself as a fighter with the kind of fearless authenticity that resonates in an era where authenticity is rare currency. She wasn't crafted in a political laboratory, polished into platitudes. She was raw, sharp, and deeply rooted in the lived experiences of the communities she served. Every word she spoke came from a place of conviction, not calculation. That made her dangerous to Hannity's playbook, because authenticity cannot easily be mocked into irrelevance. This clash wasn't just about two people on a television screen. It was about the soul of American discourse itself. On one side, the weight of media machinery, the bluster of arrogance, the comfort of entrenched privilege. On the other, a voice that represented millions who had too often been talked over, caricatured, or erased. Watching this unfold, viewers sensed it immediately. This was bigger than Hannity's set. It was a collision between the old guard and the new energy shaking the foundations of American politics. The stakes stretched far beyond the studio. Hannity's audience wanted to see a takedown, to see him reaffirm his dominance. But Crockett's supporters, and countless others across the political spectrum, wanted something else. They wanted to see dignity prevail. They wanted to see someone hold their ground against the sneer, the interruption, the insult. For many, Crockett was carrying their voice into a space that had never welcomed them. Her ability to withstand Hannity's attack was about more than personal pride. It was about collective validation. The insult, crude as it was, became a mirror for the national divide. Would America continue rewarding arrogance and mockery? Or would it finally begin listening to voices that had fought so hard to be heard? The answer, it turned out, would come not from Hannity's next line, but from Crockett's, because Hannity believed he had her cornered, that his words had the finality of a gavel striking wood. But he underestimated the power of composure. He misjudged the strength of someone who had spent a lifetime navigating spaces not built for her. What happened next didn't just flip the script of the broadcast, it flipped the very power dynamic. Hannity relied upon Dot, and as the seconds ticked by in that studio, the entire nation leaned closer, bracing for a comeback that would flip the entire conversation on its head. Sean Hannity built his empire on a simple formula: dominate the room, control the narrative, and never let an opponent breathe long enough to land their own punch. Night after night, his show has been less a debate stage than a theater of dominance, with Hannity cast as both director and star. He interrupts without hesitation, piles insult upon insult, and frames his questions in ways that leave little room for honest response. To his loyal viewers, this isn't rudeness, it's entertainment. It's blood sport. And Hannity is the undefeated champion in their eyes. Guests who wander into his studio quickly learn the rules. The lights are bright, the clock is ticking, and Hannity controls the mic. He talks over them, steamrolls their points, and peppers and jabs designed to rattle. The goal is never clarity, it's spectacle. The camera lingers on his smirk, his chuckle, his dismissive shake of the head. Viewers at home are meant to see confidence, certainty, and, above all, control. Over the years, countless guests have walked away from that stage bruised. Politicians have been baited into shouting matches, academics have been caricatured as elitists, and activists have been reduced to soundbites that strip away nuance. Hannity knows how to turn complexity into a caricature, how to strip arguments down into something that makes his opponent look weak while he plays the everyman with all the answers. Clips of these takedowns circulate among his base like trophies. Each humiliation adds another notch to his belt, but scratch beneath the surface of Hannity's persona, and contradictions emerge. For all his talk of defending the American people, he has spent decades defending the wealthy, the powerful, and the status quo. For all his sneers about elitism, he himself has enjoyed the privileges of fame, fortune, and influence. He rails against political insiders while serving as one of their most reliable mouthpieces. His entire playbook rests on a carefully constructed image: the rebel outsider who somehow also commands the largest stage in conservative media. It is performance wrapped in performance, arrogance disguised as authenticity. And like every bully, Hannity thrives on choosing his targets wisely. He often seeks out guests he believes will be easy to fluster, those new to the national spotlight, those without a built-in base of supporters, or those less adept at the combative style of cable news. He pokes, prods, and needles until they stumble. Once they stumble, he pounces. To the untrained eye, it looks like wit. To those who've seen it before, it looks like intimidation masked as debate. But there's a danger in relying too heavily on intimidation, because every bully eventually meets someone who refuses to be intimidated. And when that happens, the very tactics that once inspired fear begin to look desperate. The interruptions become flailing, the smirk looks brittle. The script doesn't land. The audience that once cheered begins to question. That is why Hannity's insult toward Jasmine Crockett mattered. It wasn't just another jab from a man who has made a career out of jabs. It was the culmination of a pattern, arrogance so rehearsed that it had become predictable. Viewers knew what to expect from him: the sneer, the interruption, the smug chuckle, and for years it worked. But against Crockett, it would collide with something stronger than bluster. Because Crockett wasn't just another guest. She wasn't there to play Hannity's game. She came armed with the calm of someone who had stared down far worse than cable news theatrics. She carried with her the resilience of a woman who had been underestimated her entire career, the conviction of a lawmaker who fought for communities Hannity barely acknowledged. His insult, meant to rattle, would instead ricochet back on him. And this time, the cameras caught something different. The panel didn't laugh with ease. The audience at home didn't smirk along. There was a pause, a hesitation, as if everyone sensed that Hannity had miscalculated. His playbook, once so effective, had just hit its limit. The bully archetype that once made him untouchable was about to become his greatest weakness, because, for once, Hannity's usual tactics would backfire spectacularly. Jasmine Crockett did not arrive in Congress by accident, nor did she stumble onto Sean Hannity's stage unprepared. Her story begins far from the bright lights of a cable news studio, in neighborhoods where the law was not an abstract principle but a daily question of survival. Growing up, she saw firsthand how justice was not evenly distributed, how wealth and privilege tilted the scales, and how people who looked like her were too often left without a voice in the system. These early lessons shaped her not into someone bitter, but into someone determined to use her voice for those who had none. She carried that determination into law school, a journey marked not by comfort but by sacrifice. While others worried about internships at top firms, Crockett juggled long nights of study with the constant weight of student debt pressing on her shoulders. She wasn't chasing prestige, she was chasing purpose. Her goal was never a corner office in a gleaming skyscraper. It was the courtroom where she could stand beside those who couldn't afford the kind of lawyers wealth could buy. She defended the poor, the vulnerable, the people society often dismissed as statistics. And in those battles, she built the steel that would one day make her unflinching in the face of someone like Hannity. Her career as a public defender and later as a civil rights attorney was less about headlines and more about humanity. She listened to mothers begging for fairness for their children, fathers facing impossible odds, families crushed under systems that treated them as expendable. Crockett carried their stories with her, and in doing so, she developed the rarest of political skills: authenticity. When she spoke, she wasn't reciting talking points. She was drawing from lived truth, from scars she had earned not in think tanks but in the trenches of justice. When she entered politics, the skepticism was immediate. A young black woman from Texas? Too bold, too fiery, too unwilling to smooth her edges. Critics underestimated her, and in doing so, they gave her the fuel she needed. Each doubt became motivation. Each dismissal strengthened her resolve. She won not because the establishment opened doors for her, but because she kicked those doors down and walked through with her community at her side. In Congress, Crockett quickly built a reputation as someone who spoke plainly, with fire when necessary, but always with clarity. She didn't hide behind careful phrasing designed to please everyone. She confronted injustice directly, whether it came from the opposing party or even from within her own. That bravery earned her both respect and criticism, but more importantly, it made her impossible to ignore. She became a voice for people who often felt invisible, and her presence in the chamber itself was a statement. America's future looked more like Jasmine Crockett than the old guard trying to hold on to power. Her composure was tested again and again. Colleagues tried to dismiss her, pundits tried to caricature her, and online trolls hurled venom her way. But Crockett had already survived harsher trials. Years of fighting for clients who had nothing but her standing between them and ruin had given her a resilience few could match. Every insult only reaffirmed what she already knew, that dignity was the sharpest weapon against arrogance. That night, on Hannity's show, she carried all of that with her: the long nights of study, the crushing debt, the courtroom battles, the doubters, the triumphs, the scars. She wasn't just a congresswoman trading barbs on television. She was the embodiment of a struggle much larger than herself. She was every woman told she was too loud, every young leader told to wait her turn, every black professional told she didn't belong. She was the living rebuttal to every attempt to silence her. That's why Hannity's insult, though designed to sting, barely grazed her. He didn't understand that she had already been tested by fire. He didn't realize that she had faced opponents far more dangerous than a television host with a microphone. To him, this was just another performance. To her, it was another chance to stand tall and remind the world that dignity endures. Her calm on camera wasn't accidental. It was the product of a life spent preparing for exactly this kind of moment. Crockett wasn't shaken because she knew the truth. Arrogance always underestimates resilience. And resilience always finds a way to rise. So when Hannity lobbed his insult, cocky, smirking, confident that he had cornered her, Crockett had a response locked and loaded. The cameras were still rolling. And Hannity leaned into his chair with the swagger of a man who believed he had full command of the stage. His voice cut sharply, pushing past Crockett's every attempt to finish a thought. He raised his volume, interjecting with half-laughs and mocking asides, a performance rehearsed through years of practice. This was his arena, and he played the role of gatekeeper with unshakable confidence. But Jasmine Crockett didn't rise to the bait. Her eyes never darted. Her voice never cracked. She waited, measured, letting his interruptions pile one on top of the other. Where another guest might have stumbled or raised their own volume in a shouting match, Crockett held still, her composure almost unnerving. The contrast was stark. One man frantically trying to assert dominance, one woman calmly refusing to surrender her ground. The panel began to notice. At first, there were polite nods to Hannity's jabs, little smirks meant to signal agreement. But as he pressed harder, their comfort eroded. His interruptions grew desperate, his dismissals sharper. Crockett's silence between his words spoke louder than anything she could have shouted. Viewers at home could feel it, the imbalance of power tilting, slowly but surely. Hannity doubled down. He leaned across the table, cutting her off mid-sentence. With a rhetorical hammer, accusations, broad strokes, dismissive quips. He was trying to trap her, to rush her into a defensive posture where he could paint her as unprepared. But each attempt slid off her like rain on glass. Crockett's stillness made his energy look frantic, almost erratic. His usual dominance. Theater no longer looked commanding. It looked strained, and that tension spread. The studio air thickened. One panelist cleared his throat nervously, another shifted in their seat. Even the laughter, once automatic, now faltered. Something was changing before their eyes, something unscripted. Hannity's performance was colliding with a presence he couldn't rattle. The longer Crockett refused to break, the more obvious his tactics became not sharp debate, but bullying laid bare under the harsh studio lights. For viewers, it was electric. They had seen Hannity overpower guests before, but this time the imbalance wasn't working. Crockett's calm radiated through the screen, exposing his noise for what it was, bluster. Every second she remained unshaken was a second that undercut his authority. Every interruption made his desperation clearer. And audiences, whether in the studio or at home, could feel the momentum shifting. The insult, when it came, was almost inevitable. Pushed by the silence of her composure, Hannity lashed out with words meant to sting, to cut, to put her in her place. It wasn't just another talking point, it was personal. He smirked, confident he had finally pierced her armor, certain that this was the moment that would leave her scrambling. The room tightened. The audience leaned forward. Then the insult came. Time seemed to slow. Hannity sat back, satisfied, while the panel's eyes darted nervously. The audience held its breath. And Jasmine Crockett, her face calm, her posture steady, prepared to deliver the response that would change everything. The silence after Hannity's insult was heavy, the kind of silence that demands something fill it. For a split second, all eyes landed on Jasmine Crockett, waiting to see if she would stumble, if she would break, if she would confirm Hannity's smug certainty that he had cornered her. But Crockett did not flinch. She inhaled slowly, tilted her head ever so slightly, and began to speak. Her words came not in a rush, not in anger, but in a cadence so deliberate that it cut through the noise like glass breaking in a quiet room. "Sean," she said, her voice calm but edged with precision, "you can try to talk over me, you can try to belittle me, but you don't get to define me. You don't get to rewrite who I am or what I stand for." The panel froze. Hannity's smirk faltered. The calmness of her delivery disarmed him more than any raised voice ever could. She wasn't playing his game. She was rewriting the rules of the exchange right in front of him. She leaned in slightly, eyes steady, and continued. "You spend night after night talking about what's wrong with this country. But the truth is, people like me, people you dismiss with a smirk, are the ones who live those struggles every single day. I didn't come from privilege. I didn't inherit power. I earned my place. And I'll be damned if I let anyone, especially you, erase that." The words landed with the weight of lived experience, not rhetoric. There was no script. In her tone, no rehearsed line. It was raw authenticity, sharpened by years of courtroom battles and political fights. Hannity tried to interject, but Crockett raised a hand, not loud, not aggressive, but firm enough to command the room. The panel gasped softly, and for the first time that night, Hannity didn't finish his sentence. He sat back, visibly rattled. The camera captured the flicker in his eyes. Uncertainty. Crockett pressed on, her voice steady. "You can't silence me with an insult, Sean. I've faced prosecutors. I've faced politicians. I've faced systems built to keep people like me quiet. Do you really think your words are the thing that's going to shake me?" The audience, watching at home, erupted. On Twitter, hashtags exploded. Hashtag Crockett Clapback began trending within minutes. Clips of her calm defiance were spliced, subtitled, shared across TikTok and Instagram. The digital crowd became her choir, amplifying every syllable. Meanwhile, in the studio, the tension deepened. Hannity attempted to regain footing, throwing another jab about her policies, about her agenda. But each new barb looked smaller, weaker, next to the dignity radiating from Crockett's composure. His interruptions, once his weapon, now made him appear desperate, flailing. Crockett seized the moment. "This isn't about me and you, Sean. This is about every person who's been told they don't belong in this country unless they fit your idea of what an unquote American looks like. This is about the single mom working 2 jobs, the young immigrant fighting for their dream, the kid in a neighborhood that never had a fair shot. You insult me, and you insult them. And I won't let you." Her voice carried the kind of moral clarity that made the room feel smaller, as though every panelist, every camera, every viewer was suddenly locked in on her. Hannity's face tightened, his smile now brittle. The bully archetype had been turned inside out, arrogance collapsing into insecurity, while dignity stood unshaken. One panelist shifted uncomfortably, avoiding the camera. Another blinked rapidly, unsure whether to step in or stay silent. The imbalance was complete. This was no longer Hannity's show. It was Jasmine Crockett's stage. Narration slowed the moment down. Each word replayed in highlight clips, every pause dissected as audiences marveled at her composure. Commentators began posting in real time. "This is how you handle a bully. This is how you keep your dignity under fire." The tidal wave of reaction wasn't just about what Crockett said, it was about how she said it. Calm, poised, commanding. Hannity's attempts to steer the conversation back faltered again and again. Every pivot looked like retreat. Every smirk looked like a mask cracking under pressure. And every time he tried to interrupt, Crockett returned to her point with unshakable precision. The more he talked, the smaller he looked. The less she raised her voice, the louder she became. She closed her counterattack with a line that would be quoted for days. "You thought you could reduce me to a punchline, Sean, but I'm not your punchline. I'm the reminder that dignity always outlasts mockery." The studio fell into a rare hush. Even Hannity's loyal panelists avoided his gaze. The cameras lingered on his face, searching for the smirk, the confident comeback, the trademark chuckle. It wasn't there. Instead, viewers saw a man who, for once, had no words. Social media exploded in the silence that followed. TikTok stitched her words into trending sounds. Twitter feeds lit up with fire emojis and GIFs of Hannity's shrinking expression. Instagram stories looped the moment again and again. What was meant as an insult had become a coronation. For Crockett, it wasn't just a rebuttal. It was a statement. She belonged in that chair, in that studio, in that conversation, not as a guest to be mocked, but as a leader to be heard. Hannity had underestimated her, and in doing so, had given her the platform to prove her strength. The mic drop moment was complete. The panel, once so sure of Hannity's control, now looked like bystanders to a shift they hadn't anticipated. The bully had been exposed, the narrative flipped, the audience electrified, but the shockwaves didn't stop there. The morning after the broadcast, the digital landscape looked less like ordinary chatter and more like an eruption. Hashtags tied to Jasmine Crockett's comeback surged to the top of Twitter's trending list. Hashtag Crockett Clapback wasn't just trending in the United States, it was trending globally. Millions of views piled up on clips shared by strangers, celebrities, and even rival pundits who usually ignored political TV altogether. TikTok loops of her calmly raising her hand against Hannity's interruption became instant memes, the kind A viral shorthand that transcended politics and entered pop culture. It wasn't just social media noise. Prominent journalists weighed in, marveling at how Crockett had dismantled one of the most practiced interrogators on live television. Progressive commentators called it a masterclass in dignity under fire. Even some conservatives admitted that Hannity looked rattled, his performance stripped of its usual swagger. One op-ed headline summed it up with brutal clarity: "The night Hannity lost control." Crockett's words, "Dignity always outlasts mockery," were replayed on morning news shows, clipped into highlight reels, and quoted in headlines. Young activists began printing the phrase on shirts. College students shared the line on Instagram, framing it as a mantra for their own lives. The ripple effect was unmistakable. What began as a tense television exchange had transformed into a cultural touchstone. Inside Hannity's world, the reaction was starkly different. Loyal viewers and partisan defenders scrambled to spin the moment, claiming Crockett had been overly dramatic or rehearsed. But the clips spoke louder than spin. For once, Hannity's base had no viral victory to circulate. Instead, they were forced to watch as their champion became the subject of endless jokes and memes. Side-by-side screenshots flooded feeds. Hannity mid-smirk, Crockett steady and unbothered. The comparison was devastating. Celebrities amplified the moment, giving it reach far beyond politics. Singers, actors, athletes, people with little connection to congressional debates shared Crockett's words with their millions of followers. "This is how you handle a bully," one pop star tweeted, racking up hundreds of thousands of likes. Calm, precise, unshakable. Suddenly, Crockett wasn't just a congresswoman. She was an icon of composure, the face of a viral parable about strength under pressure. And yet, beneath the memes and hashtags, something deeper resonated. Viewers from immigrant families, from working-class neighborhoods, from communities long ignored by mainstream politics, wrote posts describing what it felt like to watch Crockett hold her ground. "I felt like she was speaking for me," one woman tweeted. "I've been in rooms where men try to talk over me. Watching her, I cried." Another wrote, "She didn't just answer Hannity. She answered every person who ever said we didn't belong." The ripple effect was no longer confined to digital screens. By the end of the week, local town halls echoed with references to Crockett's moment. Teachers quoted her line in classrooms. Parents recited it to their children as an affirmation. This was no ordinary viral clip, it was a cultural spark, igniting conversations about dignity, representation, and what it truly means to hold one's ground in the face of arrogance. Hannity, for once, avoided replaying the segment on his show. The silence was telling. For a man who loved to gloat over victories, the absence of highlights screamed louder than any monologue. The bully archetype had been punctured, and the audience knew it. But for Crockett, the story was just beginning. Her composure on that stage became more than a viral moment. It became a movement, one that extended far beyond the Fox News studio. Because what she said that night wasn't just a comeback. It was a challenge to America itself. Jasmine Crockett's words echoed far beyond the studio, and in their resonance lay a truth bigger than television. Her poise that night was not simply about winning an argument or silencing a host. It was about reframing what strength looks like in America. She didn't need to shout, didn't need to match arrogance with arrogance. Her strength came from something deeper, the unshakable belief that dignity is more powerful than mockery. For too long, the loudest voices had been mistaken for the strongest. For too long, arrogance had been equated with confidence, and interruption mistaken for authority. Crockett's performance rewrote that script. She showed that true power doesn't need volume. It needs conviction. And in doing so, she reminded a divided country of something it had nearly forgotten. Calm truth endures where bluster fades. The moral lesson was simple but profound. America is at its best not when bullies dominate the microphone, but when voices rooted in lived struggle speak their truth. Crockett embodied the promise of a country still striving to live up to its ideals, that those who are underestimated, dismissed, or mocked can rise, stand tall, and shift the conversation. Her presence that night became proof that the arc of justice, though bent under pressure, still stretches toward dignity. Her response also carried a deeper universality. Every immigrant who has been told they don't belong, every woman talked over in a meeting, every young person dismissed as naive, all could see themselves in that moment. Crockett wasn't just speaking for herself. She was speaking for them. She was proof that the tools of condescension and insult no longer define who wins a debate. Instead, clarity and composure could expose arrogance for what it is, weakness hiding behind noise. The panel in that studio may not have realized it in the moment, but viewers across the nation did. They saw the transformation unfold live, arrogance crumbling into silence, dignity rising into triumph. And that lesson spread like wildfire, not as a partisan message, but as a human one. It whispered to everyone watching, "You are not small for staying calm. You are not weak for refusing to stoop. Strength is found in knowing who you are, even when the world tries to strip it away." In the days that followed, Crockett herself leaned into that lesson. She reframed the insult not as an attack on her alone, but as a reflection of a wider struggle between hate and respect, between arrogance and service. She reminded audiences that true leadership is not about domination, but about listening, advocating, and standing firm for those without a platform. Her closing words in interviews became a mantra: dignity always outlasts mockery. And for millions, it wasn't just commentary, it was hope. Because in the end, Crockett's moment was never just about Sean Hannity, it was about America. It was about what kind of country people wanted to build, and what kind of voices they wanted to amplify. In her calm defiance, they saw the outline of a nation that prizes respect over ridicule, truth over arrogance, and authenticity over theatrics. The debate had begun as another shouting match staged for ratings. It ended as a reminder that dignity, once spoken aloud, can ripple through a culture desperate for inspiration, and that reminder, quiet, steady, unflinching, would outlast the insult by a lifetime. The moment the cameras cut and the studio lights dimmed, the story was already bigger than the room. What began as an insult meant to humiliate had become a defining moment of resistance. Sean Hannity tried to control the stage, tried to cast Jasmine Crockett as a punchline, but instead, he amplified her voice to millions who needed to hear it. That's why this story matters. It isn't just about one congresswoman or one television host. It's about the power of dignity in an era addicted to mockery. It's about the courage to stand tall when arrogance tries to shrink you. And it's about the reminder that in America, strength isn't measured by how loudly you speak, but by how firmly you hold your ground. Jasmine Crockett showed the country that night that no insult is stronger than authenticity, no smirk bigger than conviction. She reminded us that bullies may dominate a moment, but they cannot dominate a legacy. And that's where you come in. If you felt inspired by this story, if you believe dignity must outlast mockery, if you believe voices like Jasmine's deserve to be heard louder and clearer, then share this video. Subscribe, join this community, and help amplify the message that arrogance does not define us. Because Hannity may have had the microphone, but Crockett had the truth. And truth is what lasts.